A recent study from 2018 tells us that 879,628,000 times hospital outpatient visits were made in just that 1 year alone in the United States. See, those patients were seeking the medical attention of a practicing physician who was educated, equipped, and deemed with the authority to assess, diagnose, and treat our conditions. In 1965, 50 years prior, the figure was 125,793,000. So in a little over 50 years, those visits spiked by 753,835,000 visits. And in the same year, 2018, the U.S. population was 328,953,020. Now, I know that these all seem like very large numbers, but let's put this into perspective. What these numbers are telling us is that the average person visited the hospital about 3 times. Okay, 2.674 times for all you mathletes and self-proclaimed statisticians who only want the real data. They say each person encounters 60,000 types of germs every day, and that would be 21,900,000 each year. And if that seems like a really large number to you, I dare you to spend 1 hour with a toddler. Because if I had $1 for every time I told my 5, 3, or 2-year-old, don't put that in your mouth, don't touch that, go wash your hands, don't touch your face, go wash your hands, don't put it in your mouth, oh, that's disgusting, stop touching that, go wash your hands. We'd be rich, y'all. Yet, even though we encounter all those different types of germs, we are only sick enough to seek medical attention roughly 3 times per year. Because it's only after the conditions have weakened us to a point and piled up so high that now it has become an unavoidable issue that results in what we call symptoms, such as coughing, sneezing, upset stomach, fever, rash, chest pain. The list could go on and on and on forever. In other times, some of us, due to the way that we have cared for our bodies over time, or due to the genetic makeup or disposition of our DNA, we have more severe conditions with more severe symptomatology that leads us to need more intense medical attention. And just as sometimes our physical body needs time and attention from a medical professional, I really believe that the same is the truth for our spiritual body. How often are we coming into contact with spiritual germs and we let them pile up over time until we get to the point of needing the medical attention of the great physician? Just like in our physical bodies, we have varying degrees of spiritual symptomatology whose roots are varying degrees of problematic functions and compromised immunity in our body. These things range from what I like to call spiritual sicknesses all the way to stage 4 sin. You see, at church we talk at great lengths about stage 4 sin, but the sicknesses tend to get less time and attention. One could assume that it's probably because the sicknesses aren't things that are killing people and sending them to a fiery spiritual death of hell. Not like those big, nasty, cancerous sins. But my challenge to that would be that maybe if we treated the spiritual sickness with the same precaution and intensity that we do when we fall into sin, you see, that's just a nice churchy way to say that we stop being spirit-led even if we're following Jesus, and then we start making bad decisions. If we treated the spiritual sickness with the same regard, perhaps we could get well quicker, need less spiritual medical attention, and we would live a life feeling better and actually getting to the places that God is calling us to go. So as we get into it today, first I just want to say, 11:30. TE Church, it's good to see your faces again. Oh, y'all aren't happy to be in the house of the Lord? You want to go home? It's so good to see you. Online audience, thank you for tuning in today. It is so good to see you. Make some comments, make some noise in there, give us some praise hands, give a shout out. And all right, to Church, you can never give your lead pastors, Pastors Tim and Linda Seiler, too much honor or thanks for all that they do and labor and love for us here at TE Church. So thank you, pastors, for the opportunity to speak today. So we're going to go on a journey today, and we're going to read an encounter that you probably have heard before, especially if you've been to church on Easter. But we're going to look at it from a different perspective, and today as we look at it, I'm going to challenge us to take this account just for us. Not for our neighbor, not for our spouse, not for the person you keep staring at out of the corner of your eye next to you who you think is not socially distanced appropriately from you. Not here at TE Church. We do it right, y'all. So it's safe to come back. You hear me online? It's safe to come back. Let's look at it for us today. So we're going to be in the book of Luke, and a fun fact about Luke is he was considered a physician whose journey was all to prove that Jesus wasn't the Messiah. And then through all of his research, his evidence actually only proved even more so that Jesus was, in fact, exactly who they'd been waiting for. So we'll be in chapters 22 and 23, and the common thread through this entire experience was the question, who is this man, and what did he do? And if we are honest, I think it's still a question that we ask ourselves today. Who really is Jesus? And now, we know what he did because of the scriptures. We've all heard the story. But today, let's ask, what can he still do for you, for me, and for us as the great physician? So as we look through this account in Luke, we'll see various displays of people who had become overtaken with spiritual illness that ultimately led them down the path to the ultimate separation and betrayal of Jesus. But the good news is, church, for every spiritual illness, there is a remedy. And the remedy is the miracle of the cross, with the great physician being the only one with the prescription for the cure. So let's take a look. Chapter 22 picks up after Jesus is betrayed, denied, and arrested, and mostly by his close friends. So you're probably sitting here wondering how someone as wonderful as Jesus had friends who would do this to him and treat him that way. Well, that leads us to the part of the timeline that's the final countdown to spiritual illness, disease, and death. The hidden yet compounding sicknesses of these people were diagnosable by common symptoms that even today we tend to overlook, much like we would a simple and isolated runny nose, a short dry cough, or sore throat that we write off as allergies or just a cold that surely won't have any long-lasting effects. Because after all, everybody gets sick from time to time, right? In verses 47 and 48, the first illness appears. Here we see the sickness of secrets with Judas. You know, we all know the Judas who was kissing Jesus' face, all while making side deals for money to hand him over behind his back, right? We've all heard about that Judas. They even sing songs about that Judas. Anybody ever had that friend? I know I have had it a time or two. But what about when we are that friend and we don't really know it or recognize where we are headed in the moment? What we don't see is that Judas was infected with the sickness of secrets. His symptoms were loneliness, living each day feeling like a failure, being disowned by his family for not following through on the family business, living a life where he felt he could never be his true self, and he always had to pretend to be someone he thought that others would accept. He spent his time as a disciple doing his part. He could talk a good game because, Judas was educated. He came from a wealthy family. They had money. They had prestige. So he had the best of the best growing up. So he could talk a good game. He knew all the things to say. He played by the rules, and he believed in Jesus, but he never truly surrendered his heart to him. He could never be honest with himself, so he was never honest with anyone else. He kept secrets to try to fill the void that was empty. those secrets went unchecked and they compounded into this sickness of scandal. And this is where he gave up Jesus for money. He caused a sword fight for Peter that resulted in a guy's ear getting cut off. That made Jesus have to perform another miracle in front of the arresting guards. And that was the thing that wound Jesus up in jail. Woo! Talk about a wild night, y'all. And we all know the only people who love a scandal more than the ones involved are the people watching you and waiting for you to fall like the prison guards did Jesus. Verses 63 to 65 say, the guards in charge of Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and said, prophesy to us, who hit you that time? And they hurled all sorts of terrible insults at him. Okay, so maybe your scandals don't end up with someone cutting a guy's ear off with a sword. But perhaps they do end up with someone in your DMs, PMs, or TMs, or your bed who shouldn't be there. Or maybe it's $5 here or there from the register at work. Or maybe it's a puff, sip, slurp, snort, or chug. Or maybe, unfortunately, it's actually not so different than the one that we see here. And we do end up going for a ride with a light show that ends up with our hands cuffed behind our back and our faces pressed against the bars, crying out to God and wondering how in the world our life has gotten to this point. And when it's over, we have to face the people we hurt and those who want to see us hurt. See, this is the sickness of scandal in full effect. And if we back up to verses 56 to 62, we see the sickness of scared play out in its fullest. You know, Peter was always okay as long as he had Jesus there to follow. But once Jesus was out of sight and out of reach, his fear set in. Peter became afraid. That sickness took root in his heart and began to manifest through his denial of even knowing who Jesus was. Peter often gets a bad rap for always taking his eyes off Jesus, both on the water and in the garden when he denied him 3 times. But I think we are more like Peter than we realize sometimes. If we catch ourselves in uncomfortable situations with the tendency to quickly respond with the words, but what will, ... And you can fill in your blank there. What will happen? What will people think? What will people say? What will my boss do? What's going to happen to me? There's a root of fear that has taken place in our hearts. And if untreated, the sickness of scared will settle in and keep us with our backs up against the wall, squirming with fear and willing to say or do whatever we have to do in order to get out of it. Think of the last time you were confronted with a potentially life-changing situation. Was your first reaction to lie or confess? Did you have to cook up a story, make an excuse, rationalize, justify, complain, or blame someone else? Or did you come from an honest place in a repentant heart, ready to grab the hand of Jesus and walk through the problem, just trusting him? When we let these sicknesses lay dormant in our spirit, they start to compound into larger conditions. You see, I can remember a time back in the day when I was young, fun, cute, and seemingly invincible. Anybody remember those days? Both of my close friends who I was running with at the time had gotten these crazy sore throats. And each of them quickly went and got checked out by the doctor like good girls do, took their antibiotic, and they were better in no time. However, it was not without passing it on to their dear friend. Seeing how quickly they recovered, I figured I would just wait it out and it would pass because it's just a sore throat and it's probably just allergies and ain't nothing gonna hold me down, right? But before you know it, I felt like I was breathing fire. I was eating ice cubes and cough drops like they were filet mignon, and not even the antibiotics seemed to help. See, it had spiraled so quickly and began to compound that it was out of control before I realized it, knew it, and understood what my next steps were going to be. The sickness of spiraling had set in, much like we see happening right here in Luke. Because if we continue on, we have all of these people, some following Jesus and some not, who we see creating this critical compounding illness. We see the sickness of secrets, the sickness of scandal, the sickness of being scared turn into the sickness of spiraling because none of them were treated effectively from the beginning. Verse 66 says, "At daybreak, all the elders of the people assembled, including the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. Jesus was led before this high council, and they said, 'Tell us, are you the Messiah?' But he replied, 'If I tell you, you won't believe me, and if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated in the place of power at God's right hand.' They all shouted, 'So are you claiming to be the Son of God?' And he replied, 'You said that I am.'" Hashtag King of Kings and King of Shade. "Why do we need any other witnesses?" They said. "We ourselves heard him say it." But did they? These people thought that they knew better than Jesus. And what better way to combat the sickness of spiraling out of control than with the sickness of self, strength, and superiority? We've all done it a time or two. Some of us keep on doing it. When we go through those seasons of life where everything seems to be going wrong and it's one thing after the other, we call our smartest and brightest friends to help diagnose us. Then we make a treatment plan based on the evidence-based practice of Google plus their knowledge. And we go to work. And sometimes, like we see in this last passage, we even bring Jesus right into the center of it because we're good Christians. But when we don't like his answer, we make our own recommendations and write our own prescriptions based on ourself, our own strength, and the superiority of self-proclaimed positions. You see, Jesus gave a very physician-like response here. It was factual, it was peppered with some technical jargon, and it left the next steps up to his audience. You see, a doctor has the authority to tell you what to do, but doesn't exercise their power to prove who they are or why they hold that authority. Jesus was the exact same way. He fought these spiritual diseases with recommendations and not with the wrath of his ego. As we move into chapter 23, these people are moving into full-blown spiritual critical condition. With each small illness and its compounding set of symptoms, we see Jesus moving closer into the arms of the Father and into his destiny, but farther away from the hearts of the people. But isn't that how it usually happens? A slow fade over time where we doctor ourselves with home remedies and essential oils that work for the initial symptoms. But as the symptoms aren't all healed and some linger in our body, those tend to not be a lasting or long-term fix. The sickness of subtle separation sets in and begins to spread. Let's read in chapter 23. The entire council took Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray and telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government, and by claiming he is the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You said it." Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." But you see, that crowd became insistent. "But he is causing riots by his teaching everywhere he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem." Oh, he's a Galilean. See, Pilate saw an opportunity to not have to deal with his problems. When they said that he was, Pilate sent him over to Herod Antipas because Galilee was actually under Herod's jurisdiction, and Herod happened to be in Jerusalem right at the same time. You see, when God's in the details, it gets set up pretty quick, y'all. The more Jesus challenged these people to get uncomfortable, to think bigger, to set themselves apart, the louder they cried, "No." They refused to listen to him. They missed who he was, and they wanted rid of him so they wouldn't have to change. Ultimately, this caused the sickness of subtle separation to overtake their hearts with infection, turning them spiritually septic. They had no idea who Jesus was, so they made up an answer and fed it to the people, and they fed it to Pilate, changing his narrative to fit their agenda propagated by their flesh and ritualistic religion. Funny how that happens, huh? But they really thought they were right. They followed the scriptures to the letter. They fixed their eyes on what they studied instead of who they were supposed to be studying. So they insisted that Pilate had to do something about this. But just like Pastor Tim always says, you cannot fix a spiritual problem with a political solution. Verse 5 says, then they became insistent. But he's causing riots by his teaching everywhere he goes, all over Judea from Galilee to Jerusalem. These people wanted him dead, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted because the sickness of spoiling had set in. They had gotten spoiled by their positions, their knowledge, and their way of practicing their faith that they felt they had the right to determine how things should go. That don't happen to any of us here, though, right? Prior to COVID, can't nothing keep me out of church. Ain't no rock gonna cry in my name. Then we gotta beg y'all to register every single week. Sometimes we get spoiled by something that's so good that when it has to change and it gets hard, we don't want to do that. But you see, this is a monumental moment for Pilate as the leader. He can either do what's right or he can do what the crowd wants. Because many times as a leader, you got to make really hard decisions and say really hard things and upset the way that things have always been. But when your crowd is spoiled, you better look out, buddy, because the pressure is on. These people were riddled with compounding spiritual sickness. They were dying a slow spiritual death, and the infection in their hearts and minds had taken hold so strongly, they didn't even know it. We call that cognitive dissonance. Some of them contracted their sicknesses even while they were serving God. And some of them even while they were leading people as the religious and faith-filled elders of the time. These weren't people who were far from God. In fact, up to this point, these were all of the people who were considered to be closest to God, closest to Jesus, who were presenting with these symptoms and sicknesses. Two of them, his disciples, who walked next to him every single day, and after all that he did, they still missed it. But don't worry, because the doctor is still overseeing the treatment plan. So it picks up with Pilate, the Roman governor, sending Jesus over to Herod from Galilee because he didn't want to have to deal with this. Somebody else's problem. Jesus arrives before Herod, and Herod and Pilate have this agreement because they didn't really like each other at the time. But once Jesus came around and started stirring things up, it became a situation of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So all of this happened. There's another trial. Jesus is mocked, ridiculed, and sentenced to a flogging. So in other words, and let me put this in modern day terms for us. They determined that Jesus' spiritual medical methods were whack, but no malpractice was happening, so he didn't have to lose his license to practice spiritual medicine, but they just wanted to blemish his reputation and call him a quack. But don't worry, like we said, Jesus was covered by the ultimate malpractice insurance policy. Often you get great coverage when your premium is high, and his was the highest. It was death on the cross. So much like I had become infected with that sore throat because of my proximity to my friends in that story I was telling earlier, by this time, Pilate had become infected by his proximity to the people. It was a defining moment. Was he going to do what's right? Was he going to do what's in his best interest? Or was he going to do what he had always done? Because Herod was like, I'm not dealing with this mess. You clean this up. And he sent him right back. Verse 18 picks up with, then a mighty roar rose from the crowd, and with one voice they shouted, kill him and release Barabbas to us. See, Barabbas was this other guy that was in prison for taking part in an insurrection, which for those of you who don't know what that may be, it's a violent uprising against authority, and it was in Jerusalem against the government. And also, in addition to all that, he was on trial for murder. Great guy. I can see why the people wanted him over Jesus, right? Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus. But the crowd kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Verse 22 says, for the third time he demanded, why? What crime has he committed? I found no reason to sentence him to death. So I will have him flogged and then I will release him. But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed. How often do we go into a situation demanding what should happen because of the voice that we feel we've earned the right to have? So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die as they demanded. As they had requested, he released Barabbas, the man in prison for insurrection and murder, but he turned Jesus over to them to do as they wished. Pilate didn't believe that Jesus was a criminal preaching anarchy or blasphemy. But the problem was he was infected with the sickness of suggestion, the sickness of systems, and the sickness of should. And all because of the position that he held. The cries of the people began to outweigh what God was trying to do in Pilate's heart. The system in place became more powerful than the one who gave the instruction on how to put the system there in the first place. His authority was stunted, and when he had an opportunity to be a leader, he simply became a politician, and his lack of vision made him go from a man of I could to a man of I should. You see, we don't have to be diving headfirst into the sickness of stage 4 sin to still get it wrong, guys and girls. All of these people we have been talking about were doing acceptable things on the outside, but they had ignored their inner spiritual sickness and disease for so long that they had not recognized their spiritual vital signs were in disarray. They needed a doctor, but instead they started doctoring themselves. You see, in the story I told about the time my throat was on fire, what I didn't tell you was that the reason the medicine didn't work is because every time prior to that, including this time, I took the medicine wrong. I would typically take the antibiotic until I felt well enough to get back to what I wanted to do, and then I'd quit taking it. I'm not going to keep taking this junk. I feel better. I'm good. Ain't no snot going to keep me down. What happens when we do that is we become prone to secondary and potentially worse infection. Because I didn't take the medicine completely, I didn't get rid of what was making me sick, and that led to a secondary infection that was now worse than the first one and needed additional medical treatment. See, I'm prone to having a weakened immune system due to respiratory issues and chronic asthma, along with a lot of allergies. Yet, I don't take a multivitamin. Obviously, the gym is not on my monthly subscriptions list. And sometimes I like to eat too many French fries and chicken nuggets. There you have it. Although my body is constantly fighting against itself, I can't stand up here and say that I'm doing everything I should to stay physically healthy at all times. But isn't that the same for our spiritual health as well? See, we're all prone to some kind of spiritual sickness, whether it be one we looked at today or one that God is still revealing to our hearts. Some of us have already been infected and have been trying to fight it off, but we're just not doing it in the right way. You see, the church is often referred to as a hospital for the spiritually sick. So my question for you today is, have you followed the prescription of the great physician? Have you been utilizing his house, your faith, your testimony, and his presence as an antibiotic that you take when your symptoms are bad enough and then you stop taking when you feel better or you're in a better place or, life is better and good? Or are you utilizing his house, your faith, your testimony, and his presence as a multivitamin that is filling your spirit to keep you healthy and strong every single day? So let's go a step further. And are you supplementing your multivitamin with the spiritual probiotic and fish oil of serving sacrificially, sharing consistently by gathering together in his house, giving generously your first and your best, and growing steadily through studying, prayer, life classes, galvanized with the foundation, or a grow group with Limitless? See, the reason we need those supplements, and especially the probiotic, is so that we can properly digest the spiritual food that we eat, so it does not just sit in our body as spiritual fat, but we are actually able to use it as fuel to do what God is calling us to do. If you're not taking them, you're likely on your way to becoming spiritually septic from the infection of subtle separation, among many others. And when this happens, the measurement of our spirit's basic function are our spiritual vital signs. And those include love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But they start to read dangerously low. And the fruit of your life is nowhere to be found. When you walked in, you were given your very own sanitized pen. So what that means is take that with you. Don't give it to nobody. Don't let nobody else touch it. And a prescription page. And if you're watching online today, you might want to grab a piece of paper and a pen so that you can participate in this as well. But this is another reason why you guys got to get back to the house. You miss out on stuff. I want you to take it out because we're going to go see the specialist today. You see, Jesus is so good that not only is he the great physician, he's got the power, authority, and experience of the specialist too. He's the only doctor that heals our inner man and that can bring us back to life. He's the only one that can reach into our hearts so that death can be arrested and we can again have life. So maybe your prescription today needs to read, I'm going to get back to church on a regular and consistent basis and make that a first priority. Maybe your prescription needs to read, injection of faith and obedience. I will begin today by giving God my first and best through tithing 10%. Because let me tell you, God can do more with your 10% than you could ever do in your life with 100. Or maybe you need to see the specialist to experience the fullness of God's power by calling on him as one of his following names. So your prescription would read something like this. Schedule an appointment in his presence while you call upon Jehovah Jireh, the specialist of provision. Jehovah Rapha, the specialist of healing. Jehovah Nisi, the specialist of hope, victory, and focus. Jehovah Makadishkim, the specialist of sanctification and holiness, who will cure us of spiritual sepsis. Jehovah Shalom, the specialist of peace, comfort, and strength to calm our anxieties, fear, depression, and strife. Jehovah Sabaoth, the specialist of fighting our battles. Jehovah Ra, the specialist of extravagant nourishment and physical healing. Jehovah Sekidnu, the specialist of justice, rightness, righteousness, and deliverance. Thank you, Jesus. Or Jehovah Shammah, the specialist of being present and overcoming our loneliness. You see, whatever you came in with today, whatever sickness has been bothering you, whatever you've been just wiping your nose and coughing it out with and doctoring yourself with, Jesus cares about it all. And the longer we stay spiritually sick, the quicker we approach a spiritual death. And that is not what God intended for your life. So today we're going to take a moment where someone just worships over us. And we can sit in a moment of prayer and ask God to reveal what his prescription is for you today. And we're going to write that down on our paper as an act of faith, because sometimes we got to take a step and we've got to do something to show God that we're serious about this thing. And we're not just going to do things how we always did, and we're not just going to stay sick, ignoring these little illnesses that creep up from time to time. So just take a moment. Let him heal you today. Let him invade your space. Let him invade your heart. Let his spirit surround you and speak to you about those places that only the great physician can cure.
Your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new. Now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made me new. Now life begins with you. It's your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new. Now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new. Now life begins with you.